Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at Flexbox items and how they can unlock some more control in our layouts. Okay, so this is our scene to introduce Flex item properties. There's a div with 3 elements in it, 1, 2, and 3. They all have an item class, and then each individual element has an item 1, an item 2, or an item 3 class to select individual elements. Our container goes to the width of our view here. It has a height of 300. There's a border so we can see what's happening. We've already set display effects, and we've added a gap of 10 pixels to have a little space between the boxes. And then in our items, there's a background color of pink, a border, both of these to kind of see what's happening. And we have set a width and height to 70 pixels. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is Flex Grow. So Flex Grow is off by default. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a Flex Grow to my item 1. So dot item 1. And we'll set Flex Grow to 1, which is a unitless value. And what we see here is Flex Grow allows the element to take up the available space as the viewport expands. I can also, if I take this out for a second, I can set my Flex Grow on all of these. And now we have 3 columns. There's a little bit of a caveat here that we'll get into a little later, but for now, there's 3 columns. I can add Flex Grow individually to each one of these elements. So let me just add one for 2 and 3. And now they each can grow. And then by changing this number, I control how quickly they grow relative to each other. So if I make this 5, it grows 5 times as quickly. Similar to Flex Grow is Flex Shrink. So right now, as I resize the window, they kind of grow and shrink proportionally. If I set the Flex Shrink to the same number as Grow, the item 1 and 3 will keep their size a little quicker, and the one in the middle will shrink faster. I can also set my Flex Shrink to 0. So let's see how I want to do this. Let's make each of these Flex Grow of 1, and then we'll set the Flex Shrink of item 1 to 0, which is the default. And what will happen is once item 1 hits 70 pixels, which is defined up here, it won't get any smaller. And if I make this even more, so we can double this, see, it will hit that number, and then it won't get any smaller. And you can see it's pushing the elements right out of the parent container. Okay, so let's just go back a minute. So that's Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Flex Basis. Well, okay, the important thing to understand about Flex Basis is dependent on the primary axis, the main axis of our Flexbox container. So by default, we know that a Flexbox container, the main axis is like this, and that is row. So in that instance, the Flex Basis would define the width, the preferred width of the element. If the Flex container's main axis is set to column, the Flex Basis will control the height of the element. So let's show this here. So if I go item 1, dot, because it's a class, and I say flex basis of 140 pixels, we'll see that it overrides the width and sets it here. The preferred width becomes 140. If I set my flex direction to column, now the flex basis is referring to the height, and it is overriding that height parameter. So one really handy use of flex basis is to create equal columns. Turn this off. Turn that off. Get rid of this. Okay, so let's start by saying each element can grow. We'll set that to 1. And so far, so good. It looks like they're all behaving the same. But what happens if I add a different amount of content to each of these columns? So now item 2 is filling up more space than item 1 and 3. And I'm also going to get rid of the height on my container, so it's more responsive. Okay, so if I want each of these to be equal columns, what I need to do is set the flex basis, the preferred width for all of them, to be 100%. And now we have equal columns, which is really handy. And what's cool about this is if I delete, let's say item 3, or I'll just comment it out, now we have 2 columns. And if I add another one, now we have 4 columns. Another instance where flex basis can be handy is if we want to create like a side nav. So let's get rid of item 2 for a second. And here, I will set my item 1 to have a flex basis. There we go, 250 pixels. And we will set the flex shrink to 0. And this could act like a nav bar that always stays the same size while the other content adapts. Like margin and padding, we can write these as shorthands. So for example, if I say flex, and I give it 3 parameters, the first parameter is the grow, the second parameter is the shrink, and the third parameter is the basis. If I use 2 parameters, then the first parameter is the grow, and the second parameter becomes the basis. If I use 1 parameter, then the grow is set to 1, the shrink is set to 1, and the basis is set to 0. So it would be the equivalent of this. 1, 1, 0. Grow set to 1, shrink set to 1, basis is set to 0. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about, just delete all this, is the aline-self. So the aline-self lets us have overrides in the secondary justification. So if I make this height 200 pixels, and we'll say align items to flex start. Whoops, we'll do that over here. Container. Okay. Then with the align self, and here we're going to add one more. It lets us override one of the other items on the cross axis. Okay, so that is an overview of the flex item parameters.